friends. Thank you for joining us this evening. I'm your host, Zen Garcia.
Because we are told that after the great war that they fought with God, they became cold in their blood and they cannot stand freezing weather, which is why they require human blood. And also, they require fire always to be kept working where they are. Credo Widwa. Welcome, friends. I'm your host, Zen Garcia. This is Momentary Zen here on Revolution Radio. And we broadcast live every Wednesday evening, 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern, out of the East Coast, United States of America. And I appreciate all of you taking the time to join us this evening in live broadcast. It's my great honor and pleasure to be able to speak to you in this way and to be able to share the strange, weird, esoteric things that I've come to learn of the reality that we are contending with regard to the powers, the principles, the rulers of darkness and wickedness in high places. And certainly there seems to be an acceleration to the agenda of the powers of legion, the forces of darkness in this world, and that the gap between what is the material and the spiritual seems to be overlapping, so much so that these entities are able to enter and to influence humanity in ways that they may not have been able to prior. And so we are certainly in a spiritual war, and humanity is recognizing more and more that there's something to the whole theme of what the book of Enoch speaks about as far as the condemnation and the curse of the spirits of the giants and the fallen angels, and how because they have no part in salvation, that upon death and dying they must seek a body to possess in order to maintain form and to hold manifestation within this time space dimensionality. And that's also something that is brought out in the very ancient traditions and oral um, the oral lore of the indigenous peoples worldwide, and also the mythologies of all the nations of the world. And speaking about a very ancient time when these entities, those demagogic rulers that came here to this earth being banished by the Most High God, that they were cast down, exiled, and held prisoner here. And they had arrived a long time before our ancestors as far as modern humanity and the children of Adam and Eve. And it is preserved in the legends, the ancient lore of the indigenous peoples and native peoples, also worldwide, that these entities, when they descended out of the heavens, what the Sumerians called the Anunnaki, those who from the heavens to the earth came, that these particular deities demanded reverence, and that more than anything, they wanted to be worshiped as gods, and that in establishing what has come to be known as the pagan religions worldwide, that give and honor a pantheon of gods and goddesses that they instituted into their religious practices ritualized blood sacrifice. And so we're going to talk about that this evening. And I'm going to share with you some insider testimony of individuals that have put themselves at great risk in speaking about the things that they have revealed to the world. And it's only by the grace of God that their testimonies were and have been preserved by researchers, investigators, and those that have done a tremendous service to humanity in sharing these stories and this information and these revelations. And of course, it's difficult material to digest and even to consider, and really it takes an advanced scrutiny, for someone that's really been doing uh, and dedicating themselves to looking at with open-mindedness, because one has to be open-minded to the revelations that come from uncovering the truth, because it is strangely bizarre. The things that one learns in examining the truth of reality and what we are contending and at war against. Because the forces that are battling against humanity and trying to thwart our souls and lead us astray into damnation, these forces are very ancient indeed, much more so than the history of humanity and what the Bible affirms as being the duration of the Second World Age, which most of you, uh, a lot of people believe that, the last 6,000 years is the summation of what is the history of the world, when in fact that is not true. That the Bible even reveals and speaks about of a preceding age, what is called the First World Age, and how it was that during this time, this supposed golden age when the demigods, the ruled here upon the earth as, these god kings, as they declare themselves, these Atlantean priest kings, that they had a technology and a capacity, an ability that far surpassed what we can even replicate in this day and age. And so it's an aspect of the story that, again, precedes that of humanity that has to be added on and understood in order to recognize the origins of even how we came to be where we are, because it is also the result and the consequence of the war in heaven and the division of light and darkness and the angst of the forces of the sons of God against the sons of perdition, the children of Baal, that Legion is and was the reason for why Adam and Eve were tempted to fall, and how we find all of us, all of ourselves, now caught up in flesh form. And that the original war, the rebellion of Lucifer and his temptation of a third of the angels of the Most High, and their joining him in insurgency to attempt to overthrow that of Christ in his dominion that we see preserved in Scripture. Yahushua telling us that he had seen Satan as lightning being cast down from the heavens. And without the fullness of this understanding, one would not be able to conceptually understand what he is alluding to. Because this is, again, one of those ancient mysteries that stands revealed plainly in the scriptures when one has the eyes to see and the ears to hear and a mind to understand. But yet, because these things are not spoken about in the mainstream churches and not even brought up for consideration, they are secrets that remain hidden. And it is understanding that remains for the elect alone. And that's why so many, believe that the earth is only 6,000 years old. When, the evidence stands contrary to such belief that, we are even have cities that built at a very ancient time lie on the ocean's floor, and without a doubt are evidence of technological superiority and of a presence of some kind of being, non-human, extraterrestrial, if you want to say so, which, in my opinion, is because it's connection to the fallen angels, not that these beings are from some other world or from some other galaxy, and that having evolved millions of years prior to human life, that they came here long ago in order to seed humanity or to create us in genetic experimentation, that there's belief that we are a manufactured slave race, that these things are lies. And if you don't know the biblical side of what is going on in the world and how to decrypt and to understand the fullness of the story of humanity and how it ties in to that of the rebellion of the angels, and they're again being cast down, exiled, and banished here to the earth before we then arrived, it just won't make sense to you as to what we see in the world, the megalithic structures, the cyclopean architecture built everywhere, and which again is evidence of something that science can't explain and which most people don't understand. And it's very important. Enoch speaks about a time, the things that he wrote about as far as the rebellion of the angels and the watchers and their interdiction into the affairs of humanity, the creation of a race of giants, that all of these things that had happened, they are so very relevant for, again, understanding how it is that the angels and their bloodlines, their progeny, the children of the devil, that they are the enemies of humanity, and that they have been waging war against us for very long time. And if you don't understand who your enemy is, you're simply not going to be able to understand the nature of the war that is raging even in this day and age. And so I'm going to share with you some testimony from individuals that speak about and cover, um, again, at the expense of their lives, what they have witnessed. And these are individuals that grew up in these bloodlines that unfortunately were forced to go through and to experience, their abuse on levels which really we can't make sense of. And to have their parents and family members, loved ones who are supposed to raise and nurture them, um, to let them down and to be the ones to cause them such pain is just unfortunate, and something that, for the rest of the world, we can't even imagine how these elitist bloodlines ritualize um, such abuse and even do these kind of things to their own children. It's very unfortunate. And so I want to start with one individual. I have to see if I can find her testimony because I had it included in this release of this new book. And what I'm going to be reading from is actually part of the chronicles of those things that are found in the new series from the pre-Adamites. Actually, instead, I'll look for it over the break, and I'll just start with another individual who her name is Arizona Wilder, and she was a person that had a deep connection with the Illuminati and was one of those individuals that had reached the status of what is called a mother goddess, and that she was able to perform and to be involved in the blood sacrifice in a way that most individuals like myself, yourself, were not privileged to. Well, I would call it really a curse, but that we're not. There's no way we would ever be able to experience or see the kind of horrors that she was forced to endure and forced to be part of. And it will be, again, her insider perspective that will give us a better understanding as to why the Illuminists are doing what they're doing and how it is connected again to what is revealed in the scriptures as the practices that were performed by even the ancient princes of Israel, that they, in falling away and getting caught up and having the leaven of the Watchers and the Pharisees and um, the pagan peoples surrounding them, the Baal worshippers, that they fell away and they got involved in these practices. And so this is a interview that David Icke had performed with, again, this woman named Arizona Wilder, who had a lot to say about these things. And so we'll begin with her, and then over the break, I'll look for the other individual that I'd like to share some of her testimony with you as well. And she unfortunately has not been heard of after doing a series of public broadcasts where she spoke about these things with an individual named Greg Zemansky, who is an investigative reporter and has a broadcast called the Arctic Beacon. And her name is Savali. That's her pseudonym and what she had done her work under. But all right. The question posed from Ike is, you say that you come from a certain bloodline and there is this obsession with bloodlines, this brotherhood the Illuminati have. Why is that, Wilder? Because what first started coming out was about the Aryans and the purity of the blood. And what it's all about is that the blood and the menstrual blood contains something that is important for the propagation of this race that is controlling things on this planet. We know it's a plane, but of course, a lot of people still don't know. And so, um, don't get angry just because people, don't have discernment on this. And these people that are in the organization that the Council of the 13 is under, and they have something called the Grand Druid Council or the Octagon. They are called the Illuminati. And the Illuminati are actually run by those 13 bloodlines, which are all of the royal families in Europe and in England. And they need the blood because they are, in fact, not human. They take human shape, but they are reptilian. And they need the blood. The blood helps them maintain their reptilian shape, and it helps them maintain their sanity. And it helps them to live in this world because they are not from this world. Before moving on, I want to revisit the opening quote, which was from a different individual, Credo Mutwa, who many of you have heard me speak about previously. He is a South African Sangoma, a medicine man, a shaman who, being initiated into the ancient traditions of his people, who were the Zulu people of Africa, the ancient Zulu people, that many of you know about Shaka Zulu, the uh, famous king that had successfully waged war and united many of the African peoples against the colonialists. But, anyways, the opening quote, because we are told that after the Great War, they fought with God, they became cold in their blood, and they cannot stand freezing weather, which is why they require human blood. And also, they require fire always to be kept working where they are. In the second hour, I will go into testimony where I'm going to share some of the um, information that Credo puts out about these ancient bloodlines. He calls them the Chitauli, the terrible lords who came and who rule. And so, again, this is in connection to what is the seraphim angels and their banishment. Lucifer, the great serpent, that ancient dragon who deceiveth the whole world. The stories of the Bible about this entity are connected to what is revealed in these accounts, and that, in fact, the Illuminati do worship this particular being as their God. And so that's important to understand because, again, there is a very real spiritual war being played out daily here in this world. And that if you're not able to understand it in perspective, that in the manner that I'm sharing with you here, you're just not going to be able to understand what is really going on. And I know that it's bizarre. And especially for those of you that have never heard about these things before. If you're not a person that is familiar with uh, the ancient stories and the concepts of, the Bible and Satan, the rebellion, the war in heaven, his being cast down, the iniquity that was found within him when Christ was revealed as the light and given dominion, leadership over all of the hierarchy of the celestial angels. This is an aspect of, again, the story and the origins of humanity that must be understood in order to make sense of even, our pre-existence and why Jacob was favored, Esau hated, and how there's this war, as the Dead Sea Scrolls speaks about, the wars of the sons of light with the sons of darkness, and how it is that Christ reveals the story of the tares of the field and the children of the devil, and that they appeared, that the enemies sneaking into the gardens sowed the tares amongst the wheat, and how it is that Christ said, let both grow together until the time of the end. And then at the time of the end, he would send his angels forth as reapers to gather the tares for burning and the wheat for preservation. The parable of the goats and the sheep, the wise and the foolish virgins, all of those things are connected to the story that we're going to be speaking about this evening. All right, so continuing. Which again, remember, Satan being in the form of the serpent, that the reptilians are cold blooded beings. That's why, snakes and turtles and things of that nature, lizards, they sun themselves. They get out into the sun in order to receive warmth. And so they can't regulate their temperature. All right, continuing. Ike. Does that relate to what the Nazis call the viril power and what the Hindus call the serpent power in the blood? Wilder, yes. The blood has something in it. It has secretion from the pituitary gland and from the pineal gland, and it has a very strong drug in it. This is the one that keeps them from going crazy. And it's like heroin or like endorphins, and it's much stronger. But what they need for it to be secreted in the blood is terrorization of their victims before they are killed for their blood. Or if a young woman is beginning to menstruate, they need the menstrual blood, and they have to terrorize them to get this amount in the blood to be secreted in the blood. Let me make a comment here. In the magical rites and the rituals and the mystery schools, they call the menstrual blood starfire. And as crazy and as, because God speaks about how when the woman is menstruating, that this is a time when she is unclean or considered to be ritually pure, as far as purification, uh, unclean. And yet the Illuminati, and I don't want to like freak you out or anything, but they do seek out and they do consume the menstrual blood. And they do it in ritualized manner. They consume it, they worship it, revere it. And also what is called adrenochrome, which is when the body of somebody that is being terrorized, some victim, especially those that they may ritually sacrifice, that these individuals terrorize to the point of death, that their blood is then flooded with these endorphins. And when they slaughter these individuals and then consume their blood, the endorphins, the adrenochrome, of these individuals will actually make them high, and that they'll receive some incredible euphoria from having consumed um, such blood. And so, yeah, that's part of the insanity of what we're going to be speaking about this evening. All right, continuing. Ike, is this what other people have told me about? That at the point of great terror, like the point of sacrifice, there's an adrenaline that enters the bloodstream? Is this what they are looking for? Wilder, yes. And this other element comes and secretes out through the blood. This all comes out through the blood at that time. And it's at that point that they are actually staring into the eyes of the head of it at some of these rituals, or at a reptilian. They are staring into the eyes of this person, and it's a hypnotic gaze that these reptilians have, and it holds the victim in an absolute trance, in a trance of terror. And then they are killed at that moment as they are staring into their eyes. And they can't hold their shape when this happens. The human shape they cannot hold. They go back into reptilian shape as this is happening, because it's like an animalistic type of excitement for the kill. And oftentimes they will just rip into the victim and eviscerate them and start eating the flesh of this person. And the fat from the intestinal areas is highly valued, as they use it on their skin, and they drink the blood. And the blood is highly sought after. And it goes also according to rank within these creatures as to who gets what when. And their sacrifices have started increasing in the early 1980s. The amount that they were doing has increased, and they use a lot of druidic holidays to do this, but they have other days too. They've mixed all of these satanic and what are called satanic holidays and druidic holidays in order to have these rituals, because ritual seems to be important to them, but they also use it in order to drink this blood, which they seem to need more of. One other comment with regard to, some of these things as far as the pagan holidays, and how, churches across the world celebrate Halloween, that in fact, Halloween is one of these high holy days where people are literally being sacrificed and consumed, and their blood full of this adrenaline, and then terrorized to death. They are, their blood is consumed, drained out, is stolen from them until their life is gone, and that these beings revel in performing these rituals. And that's why, in my opinion, it's important that you don't involve yourselves in, you know participating in things like Halloween, even if you think it's fun for your children. That there's a serious side to what is going on, and that if you unwittingly align yourself to participate in this kind of idolatry, that it's my opinion there are consequences. Yes, we are forgiven because of our ignorance, but you know, so many speaking out and so many trying to bring such information to your attention. Those of you that know, you cannot claim ignorance. And why would you want to line yourself with something like this, anyways? All right, continuing. Have you any idea why it's increased since the 1980s? Wilder. There are changes going on in the earth. It seems they are not able to hold their shape like they once were able to, and people see them shapeshift more and more. And they need the blood to try and maintain it, to try and maintain their human form. I believe there's a time coming because of what I've been told when they are not going to bother having to hold human shape as they had before. And they want that time to come, and it's almost upon us. Remember the whole theme of um, the Albert Pike wanting to bring out into the public the whole doctrine of Lucifer and the celebration, the worship of it. This is what they're speaking about. A time when they no longer have to concern themselves with um, trying to hold the charade and to maintain the deception. Just like the New World Order, the elites, whereas the agenda, the plan was covert and was mostly hidden and only spoken about in reference, uh, amongst themselves, amongst the secret societies and those that they consider to be, the rulers of darkness, those that are in the know, the brotherhood, those that see and understand the secret gang signs that are flashed before people, in which most people, you know, don't understand, don't see. Um, they are now speaking openly without concern and with an open challenge to humanity to do something to stop them because they believe we are past that point. We're beyond a time when humanity collectively can do anything about the agenda and about what is now coming out in disclosure. And certainly, I do believe that, it's going to take the return of Christ and second advent to decide the harvest and to bring forth the separation of the wheat and the tares. Continuing. So when you're talking about the fact that the veil is lifting on these reptilians so that people can see them far more easily, far more often, does this relate in any way to the fact that there is this desire to bring in this rigid structure, including microchipping and many other things across the year 2000, which has become known to us as the New World Order? Is that coming in because it is known that the people are going to see what the game is, and there has to be control of the people at that time, Wilder? Yes, it's very connected. I started talking about the New World Order back in the 1990s, and I was very psychologically and physically uh, affected so much by what was coming out. I wasn't watching television. I was not aware that certain individuals in this country, George Bush, were talking about the New World Order. I was talking about it because that was what was coming out, and knowing for the first time that inside of myself, I heard it in conjunction with the Nazis. And that came from Mengele. And I started realizing that there was something going on. And then it scared me, and I didn't really look into it for years. But I was being harassed constantly. I was being told at one point, I had someone telling me that, and he was ex Army intelligence, ex CIA, telling me that I was being monitored by the National Security Agency. And I didn't have the whole story then, so I did not totally understand why this was happening. But yet, I was being followed by cars and vans and that said G12 and G14. And in this last year, which has really been hard, I've been followed by G41 vans. And I had to find out what those were. And that's naval intelligence. But this whole thing is going towards around the year 2000 when they are going to establish themselves openly as a new world order. And it's headed towards that. And that's what everything is being prepared for. And I have actually got a sleeping program right now to return because I've left to return for that time. It's called the End Times Programming or Janus Programming. Ike. Janus relates back to Nimrod of Babylon. Wilder, yeah, there is a group that used to be in contact with me all the time, and they stopped trying simply because I didn't obey them. They would be in contact with me all the time. They are called Janus, which is also the Roman two-headed god of change, and their headquarters is in Brussels, Belgium, in the NATO building. And they are a group of psychiatrists, doctors who are into mind control. And they are one of the many groups involved with the Illuminati. And they would contact me and give me directions that I was to psychically kill this person or psychically injure this person or scare that person. And they'd give me this location, and I started questioning this. And I had a contact who since seems to have disappeared because she couldn't get the funding. I had called her about this group, and she's the one who was the ex CIA, ex Army intelligence person. And she knew these people. And she said, yes, you're right. This is what is going on. Ike, in your experience being brought up in this Illuminati environment, were you ever told anything about where these reptilians came from and what is the history of it all? Wilder. I was made to learn through Mothers of Darkness, which is a certain aspect of the organization, because it was an early part of my training, the history of what was the Illuminati on this planet. And what I had heard was that the Aryans were originally from Mars, and the reptilians came to that planet. They came from another place. They came to that planet to rule. They wanted to mix, and so they said with that race, but they became the overlords, and the Martians or Aryans were seeking to escape from it. They went to the moon, and then they were attacked there. And they then went to the earth and established culture here on the earth. Approximately 6,000 years ago. And at that point in time, they were doing well. And they were mixing with the indigenous populations of the earth. They were getting along. And then, about 4,000 years ago, the reptilians arrived here and again began to take over. And they installed themselves in various places underground in the earth. And also, this one part of them, the ruling part, took over and became involved in the politics, in the religion, and started controlling through these means at that point in time. And using the gods and deities that were believed in and on this planet, they started infiltrating into that and becoming that. And blood rituals started happening. And since that time, that is the way it has been. And presently, they claim to have come from the Merovingian bloodline. And there are 13 bloodlines in Europe, all that are called royalty, which are developed from or come from, and they include the Aryans in this. And they've been at a big push in this century. For example, when the Nazis came into power, fascists talking about the purity of staying pure and the Aryan bloodlines staying pure. What it actually is all about is keeping the blue eyed blonde or light red haired people, the bloodlines pure, because it is more powerful. And what is in that blood for these reptilians is more powerful. And they need that. And when you start mixing it with people who are indigenous to this earth, then it is not as powerful. It has nothing to do with a person's skin color or nationality. It has to do with keeping the bloodline pure for such use. Ike. So blonde hair, blue eyed people are the purest from the reptilians' point of view, and they want to keep that bloodline pure because of how they need to use it. Wilder, yes. When I myself realized it had to do with blonde hair and blue eyes, I cannot do anything about my eyes, and I'm not able to wear contacts, or I would have brown eyes. But one thing I did was to cut my hair off, because that was part of the rank I was. My hair was down to my knees, and I colored my hair darker, and there were times after I did cut it off that they had gotten to me. And so the hair would be light red, but that is being in compliance with them. And I did not want to be in compliance with them. I want to expose them, and this is part of it. And I won't be what they want me to be. Ike. When you look at some of the ancient accounts, like the Sumerian texts and many of the other ancient accounts, they talk about the gods interbreeding with humanity. Is this relevant to the reptilian way of infiltrating the human race? Wilder. Yes. It is because human beings all through the ages have accepted God's interbreeding or being accepted as humans. And that shows in Christianity. That shows in Judaism. They have also used Egyptology or the Egyptian religions a lot. And the present head of the Illuminati compares himself with the Arthurian legends of the Round Table. And the name that he carries from that is Pindar, which actually means phallus of the dragon. And the other name, Osiris, he has carried because he takes the name at this time, the Marquis de Libero, which means the liberator of or from the waters. I'm going to stop there for just a second because many of you know that in the work that I've done, I've spoken about how this particular being, of which Berosus, he talks about this being called Oannes. And Oannes is a fish god, half fish, half human, that coming from the seas was said to have brought culture, language, mathematics, knowledge to the different civilizations that he interacted with. And that he was the one that was responsible for establishing, their what is society, what has come to be known as advanced thinking, understanding, and that he was revered, worshipped as a god. And this was in the Philistines. they worshiped a deity called Dogon. And even in the Lovecraft novels, they call this being Cthulhu, the cult of Cthulhu. And we see that the Bible, the Philistine giants, Goliath, that when he took the Ark of the Covenant, that it was taken to a temple that worshiped this particular being called Dogon. And that even the Catholics, that the Pope, he wears a hat called a mitre. And this mitre is and resembles the head of this particular god. And it is a tribute to what is the unseen underground worship of this particular being. And so even the Catholic Church, at the higher echelons, just like in the secret societies and the Freemasons, that at the highest levels, the 33rd degree and on, that these particular beings, they know without a doubt that they are worshiping Lucifer and that they give allegiance to him. And so, again, it's an aspect of the story that is not spoken about and little understood, but it shows again how even the elitists in this, because I do believe that the Catholic faith, as far as the popes and the cardinals and those at the upper levels, they know they are worshiping in a different God. And that even Pope Francis just recently, and you can look this up for yourself, just keyword search about how he declared Lucifer as being their God. And so, if you happen to be one of the 15 billion people that is of the Catholic faith, consider that your leaders are and have allegiance and take blood oath to a different deity from that of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And so, do you want to participate in something like that? It's just like the lower level Masons who believe that they are, part of an organization that does good and is involved in community service. I mean, look at St. Jude's Hospital, run by the Shriners. Again, and the red fez, their particular hat, is connected also to Dogon and the worship, the reverence of these beings. And Credo even speaks about how the ancient shamans of his line, they also wear this red fez, this hat, and it's in relation to the reverence of these ancient gods. And, so take it for whatever you want. All right, we are at break. We'll be right back, everybody, and I'll see if I can find this other testimony. And we will be continuing with this as well, because there's a whole lot more to be said. We'll be right back for second hour.
As a bookstore for truth seekers, it's our goal to make ancient manuscripts which were once held captive by secretive institutions available for public consideration. In our generation, where wisdom has increased as Daniel the prophet foretold, we have access to many of the testimonies our early church brethren were persecuted for preserving. After being hidden for centuries, these manuscripts have been leaked from various sources throughout the earth, and it's our goal to gather these sources into printable form to make available for all who seek the ancient way. If you're looking to deepen your studies of the biblical narrative, find these ancient manuscripts and more at sacredwordpublishing.com.
Every day, questions arise.
Are the stories in the Bible true?
What if I told you that there are hundreds of confirming witnesses?
Which give intricate detail to the stories in the Bible.
Have you ever found yourself deep in the rabbit hole with questions that no one seemed to have the answers to? Join us every other Friday at 9 p.m. Eastern Time for our Ask Me Anything series with author and researcher Zen Garcia, as he sheds light on the mysteries which have us all searching together.
Your partnership with Sacred Word Publishing goes further than the publishing of ancient manuscripts and weekly video content.
You also make a huge impact across the earth in orphanages in Myanmar, India, Uganda, and Kenya.
Your support is crucial for the development of the ecclesia of real truth seekers.
We thank you for joining us in hosting Secrets Revealed, Momentary Zen, the Digital Readers Club, Ask Me Anything series, and other shows that have helped lead so many to the truth of salvation.
To become even more involved, please visit patreon.com/sacredwordpublishing, where you can partake in exclusive, interactive, patron-only content and help us continue shining the light of love in this darkened world.
Hello friends, thank you for joining us this evening. I'm your host, Zen Garcia.
Have shared with us insight into the blood ritual, the blood sacrifice that is going on in the Illuminati circles, the secret societies, and the things that they are doing behind the scenes, which most people don't know about and haven't heard or know about. And so it's not a live interview, if that's what you're asking. All right, we're going to continue because there's a lot to be covered. I'm going to go back into the testimony of Wilder, and then I'm going to bring forth what I was talking about and covering. And then I did find that what I wanted to share with you, as far as some of the other sacrifices that are going on. But I need to cover this first and get to the end of this particular, what I was talking about as far as Pindar and Osiris and the worship of these ancient gods. All right, continuing. And the story of Osiris is that he was cut into 14 pieces and thrown into the river Nile, and Isis found the pieces, put them back together again, and she could not find the 15th piece, which happened to be the phallus. So a gold phallus was made, and this is very important in this group. In the Illuminati, this is important. It is important to think about the head of the Illuminati, because what comes from a golden phallus would be a superior seed for a race. And this is what they are doing with all of these bloodlines to keep the bloodlines going. They are impregnating people of Aryan blood that hold high stations with them, impregnating them with this seed of Pindar. And therefore, it's important to keep this history in mind and the names in mind that he is going by at this time. At the time when the Crusades were beginning, and even a little before, we find in a district in the north of Spain an important mystery. The mysteries that were still extant in that time have generally been known as the later Gothic mysteries. Those who were initiated were called the Templars, or the Knights of the Holy Grail. Lohengrin was one of these. The Order of the Knights of the Grail had a different significance from another order of the Brotherhood, which had its location in England and Wales. All the stories that are told of King Arthur and his round table relate to this other order of initiation. While the Knights of King Arthur concerned themselves rather with the events and affairs of this world, the Templars were able to be prepared to receive a still more sublime mystery, even to understand the great mystery of Golgotha, which is the secrets of the history of the world. Now, the thing of Golgotha, which what the Illuminists and the mystery schools, what they celebrate as that mystery, is they believe that Christ married Mary Magdalene, and that he had children with her, which were daughters, and that these daughters represent what is called the Sangreal, the sacred blood, the Holy Grail. And they believe that the Holy Grail are that these children were the ones that seeded and then giving birth to kings, the Merovingian kings of both France and England, that it's these bloodlines that these supposed Illuminists are said to have origin, which of course is a complete lie. Christ did not have children with Mary Magdalene. When he came here, it was not about flesh. He was here to save flesh, and that he took on mortal form in order to do that. But as God incarnate into material form, his role and mission was one of a spiritual nature, not that of, that he would become a normal, regular human being. In fact, it was because he was not a regular, normal human being that he was able to perform the miracles that he did. And so the true Golgotha mystery is that when he was crucified on the cross, he actually fulfilled what is the promise and the prophecy laid out in Genesis 3:15 of his being the seed of the woman and crushing the head or bruising the head of the seed of the serpent at the same time that it was nipping at his heel. And that 1600 years prior to his crucifixion there on the cross, David had taken the skull, the head of Goliath, with his own sword, and then taking it back and showing it as a trophy to the Israelites. He was able to boast about his overcoming, because of God, the Philistine champion that had mocked and also, had terrorized the Israelites, especially Saul and all of his soldiers, for what was a 40-day period before David slew him. And so the mystery of Golgotha, which Golgotha means Goliath of Gath, is that this is where Goliath's skull, even in the Latin, Calvary means skull. And so the place came to be known as Golgotha, Goliath of Gath, the hill of the skull, Calvary. And so that's where Goliath's skull was buried by David. And so when Christ being crucified there at Golgotha, that being on the cross, that prophecy, the real Golgotha mystery, is that he fulfilled the prophecy of Genesis 3:15 and was in fact crushing the head of the seed of the serpent at the same time that the seed of the serpent, Goliath, was nipping at his heel. All right, continuing, and then we'll bring in this other story. So would it be correct to say that the reptilians came to this planet because the Aryan Martians came to this planet? And had the Aryan Martians gone somewhere else, they would have followed them there. Wilder: they would have pursued them all over the universe, yes. Ike: can we now go into some specifics about your own experience? What were you brought up to do? You say that you were identified as a bloodline before you were born. What was the role you were brought through to play? Wilder: the role that I was brought through to play in the Illuminati was as a goddess. Specifically, the address is Mother Goddess, or Starfire. And the Starfire goes back to the menstrual blood, what is contained in that. And the way that I was addressed was Mother Goddess. There are only 3 other Mother Goddesses, and there can only be 3 at a time on this planet. There is a male equivalent of which there can only be 3 of them. Why mind control someone to conduct these rituals like yourself? Why don't these reptilians just conduct their own rituals? Wilder: they don't seem to have the psychic abilities, and they look for people who have that, people in the bloodline who have that. And I've had a tremendous amount of psychic ability. And so I was picked and bred before birth. And this is also something that other survivors who have been in high positions have known about me and told me. What's the connection then between you having psychic abilities and those being recognized from the start, and you being brought through to conduct these major rituals? Wilder: well, it's kind of twofold. First of all, they needed the psychic abilities because they control or attempt to control events, because I would have the ability to foretell what was going to happen. And they needed the information to try to control an outcome that was good for them. The second thing is that during the rituals, you had to have psychic ability. You have to be very powerful in that way to call out the old ones who are also reptilian, that come from another dimension. They actually materialize from out of another dimension and are present at rituals. And they are so powerful, and there is such an evilness about them that they want out of this other dimension, and they have to be called out by someone who has that power. And the reptilians don't have this power. That's very important. They don't have this power to call out these old ones who have to do with them. What is it that the human have that the reptilians don't? That means they don't have the power to connect interdimensionally, and some humans do. Wilder. We have the ability to foresee, to be able to become vibrationally higher and to see into those levels and to go into those levels. And in fact, agencies use this. They call it remote viewing. Humans have the ability to go into the past, to go into the future, and to go to other places, to astrally leave their body and to see things. And we've always had this ability. And it's like having a third eye, which they don't have. They don't have this ability. So during ritual, these old ones are called out, and they are what Christianity would have called the demons. They are called out, and there is a circle that has a hexagon in there, which is a powerful occultic symbol. And then there is a pentagram. And then in the middle of that, there is a triangle. And if you're the one calling them out, then you stand in the triangle so that you're not devoured or taken by these creatures that come out. Ike. That creates an energy field around you which they can't penetrate? Question. Wilder. Yes. Right. They cannot penetrate it, and they cannot get outside of the pentagram. And they want out. They are always demanding to be let out. And so you have to be very powerful to keep them in line and make them go back when it is time for them to go back. Ike, why do the reptilians want to manifest these demons at their rituals? Wilder, it brings power to the rituals. It brings power to them. They are told things by these entities, and they are encouraged to go on with what they are doing, and knowledge is imparted to them through these entities. But it takes a person with the ability to bring them out and make them answer, because they don't want to cooperate. But they have to cooperate when the right person has control over them. Ike, it has to do with that person's energy and ability? Wilder, yes. Ike, you told about the Aryan race coming from Mars. One expression of it seems to be very clearly what we call the Phoenicians. The expression of it seems to be very... Oh, sorry. The Phoenicians had two deities, St. George, which became a British deity who defeated the dragon, which seems incredibly symbolic, and also St. Michael, who, according to the legend, banished Satan, or this negative force, into the abyss. Is this symbolism, the abyss, anything to do with the fact that these reptilian demons of another dimension are somehow locked into a time-space prison and they can't get out? They can only get out when they are brought out in that way. Yes, they want out of that dimension. They've been thrown into that dimension and they can't leave that dimension. And that's actually what the abyss is about, being in a different dimension. It's like something to do with the fourth dimension. And before I even knew, for example, what I was saying or realized what I was saying, I would be saying things to my therapist and other survivors that the fourth dimension was a dimension to stay away from. Not at that time understanding the whole thing. Why do these rituals take place at certain key times of the year and so often are related to phases of the moon? Wilder, because the moon has an influence on this planet and also the sun. They also take place during things that go on with the sun. But the moon, it's really kind of a very cyclical thing with the moon. It takes place on full moons, new moons. It has to do with the current religion that they are using, the Druidic religion that they've taken and used. They still hold on to the Egyptology type of religion. They hold on to the Druidism, and they are currently calling themselves Druidic. And Druidism is tied in with the cycles of the moon. which has to do with planting, sowing, and harvesting. And there are so many days they can use from this to their own purpose and their own end that they bring it about. There's also a lot of ritualization with Druidism, and they love ritualization. So take us through one of the rituals you've conducted at the highest levels of this global brotherhood. What would happen? There were people that were bred from birth. They were bred to be ritual sacrifices. I have a problem with a lot of what is said today, especially by the False Memory Syndrome Foundation, that how could all these people disappear? Or how could all these babies be born? I worked with a nurse midwife. We did home births, and it's very easy not to register a child when it's born. And then when they have these children, they are kidnapping and bringing in from other countries, and no one misses them because these are third world countries. And children have the most energy, the purest energy. They are the highest form of sacrifice, and they will terrorize these children and mind control these children. And by the time they are brought into rituals, they may be drugged, or they may not be drugged, or they may be in an altered state because of the mind control. And they are used as actual blood sacrifice during these rituals because, again, reptilians needing their blood, and they will take various organs from the sacrifice, depending on what the ritual may be associated with on that date. But they will also slit the throat from the left ear to the right ear, and the blood will be gathered in a goblet, and it will be dispersed amongst the reptilians. And after that, among people who have been participating in these rituals, and even though they seem to be disassociated, mostly these people seem to be cognizant of what they are doing. Ike, are these rituals rare? I mean, how many, say, go on in a year? Are there hundreds or even thousands? Wilder, there are things happening every month of the year. There's not a month in this 12-month system that something is not happening. And usually it's more than one. I mean, it's every full moon. And the very important rituals are the summer solstice, the winter solstice, and then there is the vernal equinox and the fall equinox. And then there is Samhain and Beltane. There's Imbolc in February. There's Lunicad, which is in the beginning of August. There's a whole week leading up to Beltane, and also whole leading up to Samhain that's called the Grand Climax. Never allow anyone the luxury of assuming that because the dead and deadening scenery of the American city, a dreadful night, is so utterly devoid of mystery, so thoroughly flat-footed, sterile, and infantile, so burdened with the illusory gloss of baseball, hot dogs, apple pie, and Chevrolet, that it is somehow outside the psychosexual domain. The eternal pagan psychodrama is escalated under these modern conditions, precisely because sorcery is not what 20th century man can accept as real. Ike, so May 1st is Beltane. Yes, May 1st is Beltane. Ike, Halloween, particularly in America, has become like a mini Christmas. It's almost like a holiday of celebration with trick or treat and all this other stuff. But what actually happens outside the public arena the night of Halloween and into November 1st? Wilder, away from the public arena, the ritual that is taking place in 6 different locations in this country where all of the councils of the 13, in the area where I'm in, it is an East Side Christian church on 7th and Temple Street in Long Beach, and it is for the High Council of the 13. And in this country, on that night, it is a satanic ritual. It is actually, there are 3 nights in a row at that church. The first night is Halloween. What happens on the night of Halloween, Walder? That night is about the worship and homage to Satan. And that is what a lot of people in this country know the devil to be. This is about the devil, Satan. And Christianity talks constantly. I mean, I believe they created Christianity to be what it is. And so they also have created the Satan. And so they control in that way. And on that night, there's a lot of bloodshed. And there are sacrifices made to Satan. There is a person who plays the part in this high council that has to do with this high council. He's not on the high council, but he has to do with playing the part of Satan. He is a televangelist on TBN. He filled in for a little while as the lead singer on the Iron Butterfly many years ago. And he has long blonde hair. I don't recall his name. I recognize his face. I saw it recently on TBN. And then this is his cover, or he is DID. And he plays this part, the great deceiver Satan, on that night on Halloween at this church. And that is what happens on Halloween. What else is going on Halloween in this country? It's just becoming so popular. It is also to desensitize people to this whole thing. And even this backlash Christian movement that wants to call itself the Harvest Festival does not realize that the Harvest Festival has to do with the Druidic religion. And again, they are still doing the same thing and celebrating the Harvest Festival. That's what the Harvest Festival is about. Are many of the so-called Christian rituals, because that's what they are, festival ceremonies to most Christians unknowingly, representations of these satanic rituals? Yes, Wilder, yes. They are one. One example is Christmas. It comes right after the winter solstice, which is a satanic or a Druidic celebration. There is a day in there called that day which is not a day. It has to do with the killing of the old king and the birth of the new king, which is a Druidic day. On the 24th and 25th at midnight, there's a ceremony that is specifically for children, and it's called the last bulb on a tree. All right, I'm going to stop here and I'm going to share with you this ritual that we find spoken about as taking place in the bottom of the Vatican. And this is from this lady named Savali, which again, she did a series of interviews with a guy named Greg Zemansky, who's an investigative reporter, and had a show called The Arctic Beacon. I don't know if Greg is doing shows anymore, but he had at one time uh, did these series of interviews which were fantastic and brought forth a lot of information connected to this theme. And so I'm going to share with you a small portion of one of her interviews before getting into one more story that I want to share with you. And that will come from Greta Mutwa. And then if I have time, I'll read some other stuff, but I want to at least cover these two things. All right. Let me enlarge the font. I'll post a link in the chat room to what I'm going to be sharing from, and then you guys can read it for yourself. Hello, Erin. Good to see you, sister. Glad that you are here and present. All right, let's continue. The satanic ritual and child sacrifice in the Catholic Church in the Vatican. Greg Szymanski. We're going to get deep inside the Illuminati, the family, the order. We have a guest who was involved with this group, born into it, for over 30 years. Her name is Savali. Savali, are you there? Yes, I am. Well, it's nice to have you here, and I know you don't give radio interviews, and I really want to thank you because I think it's really does help the American people to understand about this secret organization that you were born into, the satanic rituals in the Vatican. So I guess we could just start from the beginning and tell us right from the beginning. You were born into this from wealthy parents, and tell us about your training in this group when you were a young child and up until your orientation at the Vatican. Savali, well, that's a pretty broad area that it gives me hours. Szymanski, if you could just give us an outline. Savali, I was born into this group, born in Germany, came to this very young, and basically went through all the training that the group, all the members of the group, do undergo training to different degrees, depending on their role. By the time I was a teenager, I was a youth leader, and by the time I was 22, I became the youngest member of the Leadership Council in San Diego County, and at that time, I was a head trainer. I was the sixth trainer. I was moved up to the second position. When I was 12, I had mentioned to you about the ceremony at the Vatican that they really do make all leadership undergo at some point. Szymanski. Now, basically, when you were growing up, I remember you told me that you were instilled at a young age. You were born into a very wealthy, well-to-do family. Savali, yes. Szymanski, you moved back to the States. You were told at a very young age that you were special, that you were chosen. Am I correct? Savali, well, they tell everyone in the group that they are special and chosen. And in fact, that was one of the things that made me cynical when I was older. You will never meet a person who is an Illuminati, who has not been told and programmed for years that they are special, that they are the only one who can do the things for family. But I was told that, yes, I would do great things for family one day. And the reason why I guess I can filter some of this with an objective view is I know what my role in the group was, and it was over quite a significant number of other people. And so I don't evaluate what my role or specialness was in the group so much by what I was told, but what I did. Szymanski. So you reached the age of 12 and then you were told by your parents that you were going to an induction ceremony in the Vatican. Can you tell us how that happened and what occurred at that ceremony when you went there? Savali, okay. In tears. This isn't easy to talk about. As you know, I was 12. I was flown over to Germany. I was at, I'll call it the German father's house over there. There was some preparation for a few days beforehand. I was told that there would be a very important ceremony, and it was considered a sealing ceremony at that point. And basically, I was told a little bit about what I was expected to do during the ceremony. When we got there, we went to the Vatican. There is an underground Vatican, underneath the Vatican, a large room that I described to you when we talked before. It has 13 catacomb chambers leading into it. And what they do, as you go down these steps into the room, you can see that it's circular so that they are all rounded, and they bring out the mummies from the catacombs. And they say that this is the spirits of the fathers watching over the ceremony. And during the ceremony, there was a large table in the center of the room. It was on a top of a huge golden pentagram, and they had the ceremony there. Szymanski, how many other children were with you, being inducted with you into the family or into the order, as they call it? Savali. There were 2 other children, but there were several adults there too. Szymanski. Okay, Savali. You see, the church also brings in adults for allegiance. I was told that, I don't know if this is true, but if you rise to a certain position within the Catholic Church hierarchy, then you do have to go through that ceremony. Szymanski. So you're down in this room, your parents weren't present. Savali. No. The German father and the grandfather were. Szymanski. Well, at that point, tell our listeners what you witnessed. Savali. Well, there was a table. It looked like dark glass. In the center of this room, it was made of stone, but it looked very shiny and dark and black. It may have been something like obsidian or onyx, I'm not sure. That's the only time I've ever seen stone like that looked like that. And it had around the corners gold, I guess, channels that collects wood. And a little boy was placed in the center of the room on drugs. I think he was drugged because he was very quiet. He didn't move or say anything during the ceremony. Szymanski. This was a little 3 or 4-year-old boy, correct? And then they continued to do a child sacrifice? Savali. Yes, they did. I told you about that before. Szymanski. Now, afterwards, quite. What an unbelievable experience for a 12-year-old. I just don't know. I mean, what went through your mind? Savali. I was terrified. I was absolutely horrified. I can't describe the terror you feel when you go through something like that. Szymanski, do you remember what the words were that were said while this was going on? Savali. The man was in scarlet. He was speaking in Latin. And basically he was saying, please accept the sacrifice on this day. And when he said, this sacrifice will seal the ceremony. And then he did it. Again, I was so terrified that, have you ever been in a situation where your heart is racing, but you can't do anything? And so you're just sitting there and you're caught up, fading in and out. Szymanski. I can remember as a youth being frightened, but I don't think I've ever. Savali, no. All right. Well, imagine your heart rate going up to about 220. You can't move, so you are kind of shaking, but you are trying not to show it. It was horrible. Actually, I kept thinking inside, I can't wait until this is over. I can't wait until this is over. I can't wait until this is over. Over. Afterwards, the man in scarlet, he had a huge golden ring on his hand. He came over to the center of the room and he had each of the people who were swearing that day. I had to go forward and kneel down before him and kiss his ring and swear my allegiance to the New World Order until the day of my death. Szymanski, now at that point you were escorted out. Savali, yes. After the ceremony was over, the other people did theirs as well. They had to swear allegiance too. They were about the same age as you? The 2 children were, but there were also 3 adults there too, who did the same thing, and afterwards we were told, may the same or worse occur to you should you even break this oath. Szymanski. Phew, imagine at that age, and you weren't even really prepared for this, were you? You were told there was a ceremony, but nothing. You didn't expect anything like this from what I gathered from talking with you. Savali. It was very difficult because the sense of horrific oppression down there was the worst. I mean, I've been through some ceremonies in my life in the Illuminati. You do go through them. And I have to say, in my experience, that this was the worst. I can't explain the amount of darkness in a room like that, the amount of pure evil. It was horrible. It wasn't just what happened, the oppression. I'm a Christian now. I know the difference now between when there is evil present, oppression, or when God's love is present, and joy and peace, which is the exact opposite of what was in that room. All right, I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to go to this other story before we get to the end of the show. Give me just a minute to look it up. All right, just have to keyword search this. There's really so much more information that I wanted to cover, but maybe I'll do a part two. And I have a lot I want to bring forth with regard to this new book as well, because as I said, a lot of this information is contained within the new one. Many of you know that we released the pre-Adamite, and the antediluvian world, but there is a second portion to that. The Dragon Lords, the antediluvian kings, and that will hopefully be released soon. I'll probably do one more proofread through it and then share it. So it will probably be a couple weeks after the conference, hopefully. All right. This is from the testimony of Credit and it has to do with the adrenochrome situation as well. But in connection to the Chitauli, or one of these reptilians, and especially when they get sick, which is odd. All right. Now, there is another thing, sir. It is that one of the things that the Chitauli like to do in their underground caves, where many fires are always kept ablaze, we are told is that when a Chitauli gets sick and start to lose a large area of skin on its body, it is said that there is a disease that the Chitauli suffer, from which causes them to lose large areas of their skin, leaving only raw flesh. When the Chitauli gets sick this way, a young girl, a virgin, is usually kidnapped by the servant of the Chitauli and is brought to the underground place. There the girl is bound, hand and foot, and wrapped in a golden blanket, and is forced to lie next to the Chitauli. The sick Chitauli, week after week, being well fed and well cared for, but kept bound hand and foot, and only released at certain times to relieve herself. It is said that after the sick Chitauli shows signs of getting better, then the human girl is manipulated into trying to escape. She's given a chance to escape, a chance which is really not a chance. And then when the girl escapes, she runs, but she is pursued over a long distance underground by flying creatures which are made of metal, and she's recaptured when she reaches the height of her fear and exhaustion. And then she is laid on an altar, usually a rough rock, flat on top. And then she is cruelly sacrificed, sir, and her blood is drunk by the sick Chutuli, and which then recovers. But the girl must not be sacrificed until she is very, very, very frightened. Because if she is not frightened, it is said that her blood will not save the sick Chitauli. It must be the blood of a very frightened human being, indeed. Now, this is the habit of chasing a victim, which was also practiced by ordinary African cannibals. In Zululand in the last century, there were cannibals who used to eat people and their descendants. Even today, will tell you, if they trust you, that the flesh of the human being who has been frightened and made to run over a great distance while trying to escape tastes far better than the flesh of someone who was simply killed. Now, sir, some time ago here in South Africa, and it's still ongoing process, 5 white girls disappeared. They were schoolgirls, sir. These schoolgirls were, every one of them, a highly talented child. Either a child who showed signs of developing spiritual power or a child who was a leader of her class in one particular thought or subject of learning. 5 such children disappeared in South Africa. It was a very big story in the newspaper, and at one time, white people came to me, persuaded me to try and trace these children. And one day, a white man brought to me a rubber toy belonging to a white child who had disappeared. And I took the rubber toy in my hands, and I noticed that the creature's eyes appeared to move. It was as if the rubber toy, a toy dinosaur, was about to burst into tears. I felt very bad, as if I could stand up and run away. And then I told this white man, listen to me, the child who held this toy is dead. What are you trying to do to me? This child is dead, I feel it. And the white man, who was a television producer, took the toy, the school books, and the jersey, and he went away. And sure enough, the white school child was found dead, buried in a shallow grave next to a road. Now, other people came to me asking for my help in finding their missing children. Are they dead? Are they alive? Before I could do anything, sir, at that time, I still had a telephone in my house. My telephone started ringing, and people with very angry voices, white people voices, shouted at me and told me to stop helping those people. They told me that if I don't stop, acid would be thrown into my wife's face and that my children would be murdered, one after the other. And sure enough, my youngest son was brutally stabbed almost to death. And one day, by mysterious people whom his friends later told me had been white skinned people. And so I stopped. I stopped helping these children. I am told, however, reliably that over 1,000 children disappear in South Africa almost every month, and they disappear never to be seen again. Many people, especially in the newspaper field, think that this is the result of prostitution rackets, but I do not think so. The children, if you check the history of many of these children, they were not ordinary street children. They are school children who stand out in their class, and because of certain subjects at which they are good, or who stand out in their class because of thoughts which they are good at. Not only that, sir, but ordinary women have disappeared. This way, in Masikenge, also at more or less the same time that the 5 white children disappeared. In Masikenge, 2 black school teachers, female school teachers, disappeared in their car and were never seen again. But I don't want to burden you, sir, with this terrible story. I'm going to just read this last paragraph, then we'll stop here and then I'll share commentary. But let me tell you one last thing. After the disappearance of the 5 white school children, the police arrested a priest, a reverend of the White Reformed Church, Reverend Van Rooyen. It was said that it was Van Rooyen who was responsible for the disappearance of these poor white school kids, and he had been assisted by his girlfriend, who had handpicked these children. Before Van Rooyen could appear in court, a very strange thing happened. He and his girlfriend were shot in their little vehicle, a little 4x4 truck. And after they had been shot, the truck managed to come to a stop, a thing that a moving truck never does. And I was told afterwards by a white woman who knew Van Rooyen that Van Rooyen and his woman had not committed this crime. As the police had said to the newspapers, they had actually been murdered. Why? Because Van Rooyen was found with a gunshot wound in his right temple, and yet all the people knew that he was left-handed. All right, we're going to stop here. Gosh, there's so much more. This paragraph here says, when we were talking about the Greys, you talked about the Chitauli. You had described them, the reptilians. Now correct me if I'm wrong. Were you describing them as tall, thin, large-headed, and large-eyed beings? Yes, sir, they are tall. They walk with, you see, the gray aliens walk with a jerking motion. So if there is something wrong with their legs, but the Chitauli walk very gracefully, like trees gently swaying in the wind. They are tall. They have large heads. Some of them have got horns all around their heads. Now, let me express amazement. There exists that in one of the films recently appeared in South Africa, a Star Wars film, the latest one, shows a character exactly like a Chitauli. Exactly. It's got horns around its head. These are the warrior Chitauli. And so, anyways, it reminds me of in Pennsylvania that there was these giant skeletons found, and 2 of them had horns on their heads. And Credo Mutwa says here that the royal Chitauli have no horns around their head, but they've got a darker ridge reaching from above their forehead to their back. They are very graceful creatures, we are told, sir, but they've got this little finger. It's like a claw, and it's very sharp, straight claw, which they used to punch into human noses in order to drink human brains in one of their rituals. And so, anyways, there's really so much more that talks about these blood rituals, and there's the testimony of Princess Diane, her friend Christine Fitzgerald, speaking about the royal family and their connection to these blood rituals and how it is that they also participate. And we see that in the emerald tablets of Thoth, which are supposedly 25,000 years old, and they speak about a time when the demigods were ruling and modern humanity was not even present. This goes back thousands and thousands and thousands of years, supposedly before that of humanity. But in one of the manuscripts, it speaks about this same theme as far as, the blood ritual. Let me share that. Actually, we'll close out with that portion of the text. It's from Emerald Tablet number 8. Let's see here. Yeah. Hopefully I can find it before our break. Here it is. And you've heard me read this before, but it's so relevant. Speak I of ancient Atlantis, speak of the days of the kingdom of shadows, speak of the coming of the children of shadows. Out of the great deep were they called by the wisdom of the earth men, called for the purpose of gaining great power. Far in the past, before Atlantis existed, men there were who delved into darkness, using dark magic, and calling up beings from the great deep below us. Forth came they into this cycle. Formless were they of another vibration, existing unseen by the children of earth men. Only through blood could they have formed being. Only through man could they live in the world. In ages past were they conquered by the masters, driven below to the place whence they came. But some there were who remained, hidden in spaces and plains unknown to man. Lived they in Atlantis as shadows, but at times they appeared among men. When the blood was offered, for they came, they to dwell among men. In the form of man they amongst us, but only to sight were they as our men. Serpent-headed, when the glamour was lifted, but appearing to man as men among men. Crept they into the councils, taking forms that were like unto men, slaying by their arts the chiefs of the kingdoms, taking their form they rule over man. Only by magic could they be discovered, only by sound could their faces be seen. Sought they from the kingdom of shadows to destroy man and to rule in his place. All right, we're going to leave it there. Well, I hope you enjoyed the show. Join us tomorrow night. I'll be on with Rob Skiba. We'll be continuing our Genesis Revisited series. And this is an early night for me and don't have to come on at midnight. So I'm very grateful. But thank you, all of you, again, for taking the time to be with us. I hope that you consider the things that I shared here. I know that it's difficult, especially for those of you that have not heard about any of these things. But, all these individual accounts are confirming witness to the strangeness of what is this reality. So God bless all. Good night. Shalom.
Thank you everybody for joining us for this video and this broadcast. We appreciate all of you and thank you for your patronage. Please do like and subscribe and share with your friends. God bless all of you in your seeking.